the years I was in school, 1919 to graduated in 31, and then took 2 years of Mrs. Johnson's teacher's training. Our parents had come from, I should introduce you, Joyce, as long as I'm saying our parents. This is my sister, Joyce, Totten Bishop. And our parents had come from North Dakota for the school and the single tax colony in 1919 when I began school, and Joyce didn't because she was born at that time.
That's right.
Oh, pardon me for giving away your age.
Oh, that's terrible. I also went to school from kindergarten through high school, graduated in 1938. And I think I'll tell a little bit about Mrs. Johnson, because what wonderful memories I have of her. She was a wonderful person. She had a real presence, and we respected her and loved her very much. And we would never think of doing anything that she didn't approve of. I mean, when she said something, we knew that that was it.
Something that Mrs. John said that I really think is very important. She said about religions, you can't be a good Catholic or a good Methodist or a good Baptist unless you're free to become anything you want to be. If your parents, you see, you've got to be free to become what you want to do. And I saw a program the other night, and they were saying that, oh, it was just terrible. There was a parent, a Jew and a Catholic, had married, and one of the parents was bringing the child up both ways, They wanted to have the Catholic parent wanted to bring it up this way, and the psychiatrist said, "Oh, that's terrible. It'll disturb the child." Which I thought was interesting. They shouldn't. Neither one of them should have tried to force their religion on the child. Mrs. Johnson would never have done that. As Joyce said, she had a great presence. Posture. She stood so erect, and she always stood and played with her glasses, her chain, pulling her glasses out, these little things, and up and down the chain when she lectured at the winter course. She did have a great deal of authority in the school, and we all paid attention to her.
Right.
And it's talking about do as you please school. It was always do as you please, as long as you pleased to do what you were supposed to be doing. And the classes were regular, and Mrs. Johnson was a very strict disciplinarian in thinking that you that came to class right up to the last day of holiday. You didn't say, well, let's slough off now, or this is the weekend, we can do this. You paid attention, and right up to the very end of that.
Well, several things that I remember, she always says that we must come to school regularly, that we must come to school on time, that we couldn't stay out on school nights.
Have your homework in.
That's right.
You always had homework, and that had to be in.
But I had some excellent teachers, and I think teachers are very important, and I learned a lot from I can remember several teachers. Mrs. Johnson taught us, the seniors, every year. She taught the course in single tax.
Right, I had that from her.
Did you?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Then I think Mr. Edwards was an excellent teacher. We had him all through high school.
Right.
No, I think maybe we had better teachers than you did, because I was a little older than you.
You did. Because by the time I came along, the Depression was in full swing, and it was very hard to get teachers. And I think her standards had to be dropped a little to get teachers at all. But besides the arts and crafts and folk dancing.
And drama. Don't forget drama, because that was a big, we always, even in kindergarten, were putting on plays, The Three Little Pigs, or whatever they were. We dramatized them. Everything was dramatized.
Right. But we also had a good foundation in the science, math, English, and history.
Latin.
And in high school, there was no choice of what you take. You had 4 years of English, 4 years of math, 4 years of science, and 4 years of history or social studies. So it was, it was very structured. It wasn't saying, well, instead of mathematics, I think I'll take typing.
Yeah.
There was no choice.
That's right. But I do think it was hard knowing that the public school had grades. And they could say, well, I've gotten the ones that we knew. And we had no grades, so you never knew where you stood. And it made me feel a little insecure that maybe I wasn't very bright because didn't come along.
Well, when I was in college, or applied for college, they said, well, we're going to send it for transcripts of your grades, and I said, I'm sorry, but the school that I attended had no record, didn't keep grades on people. And so they sent there anyway, and of course they had been kept on me. And this is what none of the students, I never knew, I went all through school and I never knew that there were grades kept on me the whole time. So there was.
Oh, yes.
But that was a lovely
because
part
it was
of
an
it.
accredited school.
That's right.
They had to
Mhm.
have it accredited.
Let me insert here too, Joyce, on that. The records were kept, I know, because I taught frequently, and I had to keep these records. But Mrs. Johnson did not even let the parents see these grades unless they requested and wanted to know how their child was doing. And she said the reason she didn't, because parents were apt to say if the child was doing something that was of not pleasure to them, all right, I know what that grade was, and da-da-da-da. They could not keep it from the child.
Mhm.
I don't know if you
Yeah,
realize
that's
that.
right. Yeah, I see that.
And then I think when talking about your professors, that you mentioned at one time that Ollie Taylor, and I wish you talked a little bit about Ollie Taylor.
I had him in high school for English, and I learned a great deal from him. I learned English literature, good foundation in English literature, and also grammar from him. He was an excellent teacher.
I think Horton was when he was here.
Yeah. Horton Crane.
Judd. I think a lot of good teachers, but of course, they weren't paid anything. They were just lucky to get some Antioch students and people who are willing to teach in a school with ideals. I was going to say that about grades, I remember when my children were going to school, a public school in Louisville, and the principal said, the only reason for grades is so the parents who want the grades, so they can brag that my children was an A student. And what does this say, these labels on the cars now?
My child is an honor student.
Well, yes, they go around with them on the cars. My child is an honor student, making the child self-conscious. And Mrs. Johnson certainly didn't want any child to be self-conscious.
That's right.
Or to fail. So,
Right. Well, if you followed her rules, there was no failing in this school.
but then I carried that too far. I thought failing was such a dreadful thing to do. Mrs. Johnson always said, no child must fail. And I thought, oh, failing would be awful. So with my own children, no matter what, I just didn't want them to fail. And then I thought, failing is not bad. You learn by your failures. It's not a bad thing to fail. Mrs. Johnson didn't want the grades to make a child fail and to stay behind in school. But that is bad, yes. But failure in itself is not bad if you're going to learn from it.
But it wasn't it. But it was grades that she was talking
Yes.
about. Not learning through experience.
Well, what was the happiest?
The happiest part of my
yes.
growing up? Well, there's lots of happiness in it. Folk dancing, plays, the Bluebird, and the Pied Piper that Mr. Robin Ray put on. There are really a lot of highlights in.
I was thinking that it was the whole community. The school
That's
was the
right.
center of the community, and so that it was just one great, big, happy family for us. And in 1940, I graduated in 39, there were only 31, only 1,500 people in town. Isn't that something?
Yeah, that was it. It was with the winter course, the people coming down, and we could go hear Mrs. Johnson's lectures.
But it was certainly a very broadening experience because we weren't just people from here, they came from all over. That made it more interesting in school. Now I think that's enough.
I do too.
Let me ask you about this question though. Joyce, you didn't say whether you went on to college.
Oh, yes, I do.
You did. And of course Claire did. What did you find in going to college? Was it difficult because of your experience in the School of not have any grades and exams.
The one thing I did have to learn in college was how to study for exams. You know, I would study, and it was interesting, you know, everything I studied, but I had to learn how to take notes, and I had to learn how to take exams. Those are two things that I did not know, but that's all. You learn those two things.
But you adjusted quickly.
Oh, yeah. I was, you know, first semester was C's and B's, but then it was better grades after that.
Francis Mitchell kept track of the boys from organic who went into the Air Corps service. More boys from here, from the small organic, were in the Air Corps than the public school. And I think probably the organic had a lot more college graduates and people who've gone and gotten their PhDs than from the public school. So if there's anyone concerned about they're not learning or having a hard time.
All right.
Recently, a teacher from Montevallo came to Elder Hospital. And she said, I thought maybe it was when the Montevallo was a girls' school, but it wasn't. It was after the boys had come in too. And she sought me out that evening at Elder Hospital. And she said, I want you to know that when an organic school graduate came to Montevallo, we were all excited.
Really?
She said they stood out on the campus for their enthusiasm, their deep interest in how they knew how to think.
That's right.
That's
That's
from
what
a
this
teacher that
does.
was in Montevallo just recently there.
Well, I think some of the pleasant memories I have are May Day. We always had a big celebration May Day. It was singing too. We always had singing. And then we had a choir when I was in high school. And then the folk dance parties. On Friday night we had folk dance parties. And everyone danced, the old and the young together. Remember that? I mean, it wasn't just young people. It was a mixture of all ages.
I read something one time, some teacher was doing this, teaching the children spelling as they were all dancing around in a circle around the room. They were doing this, and they was saying that people learn when there's physical activity too, that your mind works better with physical activity. And that's the one thing, we didn't sit down 8 hours a day at a desk. We were up doing as well as, of course, going from building to building and moving around. It was not that having to sit still all the time.
And I thought it was great of Ms. Johnson having the girls learn manual training. And we all learned how to use hammer, nails, saws, and that sort of thing, and not just the boys. I mean, we all had both shop, manual training, and the arts. And we had, in the arts, we had leather, painting, weaving, clay, but then silver and silver work for a while, all through my high school years. We had all kinds of arts, not just paint, clay. We had a kiln. So we were exposed to many more things than you would be at a public school.
And these were required subjects.
Yes, absolutely.
And the manual training, if you remember, was separate from the arts and crafts. The manual
Yeah.
training was required, and so was the arts
Yes,
and crafts.
absolutely.
And then when you were speaking of the movement of one to the other, whether you were conscious of it or not, that was all structured and programmed in that you had an academic subject, and then you had a creative subject. It's the reason there was no time for study periods.
Yeah.
And Mrs. Johnson used to say to us, or to me in later years, it was quite enough for young people to be at their subject, mental subject, for the 40 minutes. And then even with the homework, it should be very light. Because all they need to really know are basics and where to go to get facts.
That's right.
One of our organic students, Monty Thalbers, when he graduated from the University of Alabama in engineering, he said, all I need to know was in this little 50-cent handbook.
Well, I think we learn to think, and that's the greatest thing you can learn. Learn how to think and learn where to go for information that you need.
And didn't you feel too that you acquired a lack of fear?
But it was the joy of
life itself.
there was a school in Louisville, 2 schools, girls' schools. One of them was really such a tough school. They said the girls didn't ever go on to full 4-year college. They settled for 2-year college. They'd had enough. They didn't want to study anymore. And I met 2 people who'd gotten to Antioch early. They were 17 when they both went to Antioch. And their parents had pushed and pushed and pushed, and they both said they were not going to read another book. And we met them, they were in their 40s, and they had not read another book because they were through with learning. Now, that didn't happen. I can tell you one story about a teacher in junior high who let the children go out. She was not used to organic education, and she let the children go out and play tennis any time of the day they wanted. Remember that?
I remember you telling me that.
And the children were saying, we want to have a class.
We want to learn.
They didn't want to go out and play tennis. They wanted to study. That's the way it was. No,
That's it.